Learning objective 8 is earnings per share, and there are two flavors of this, basic and diluted. The way to think about it is basic is what is currently outstanding in shares, and diluted is assuming that those who have the right to convert do so if it hurts the EPS. In other words, diluted EPS is a worst case scenario for earnings per share. The most common metric is the EPS. Let's look at how we compute basic and diluted. The formula for basic is right here, net income minus dividends for preferred, because we're looking at the EPS for common shareholders, divided by the weighted average number of common shares outstanding for the year. There's that phrase again, common shares outstanding. Weighted average means that we know that there may be transactions during the year that make the outstanding shares go up or down. So we take the weighted average for the denominator. That is the basic earnings per share. Diluted earnings per share is when we take all the dilutive securities. In other words, these are the securities or other rights that people have and can opt to convert them to common shares and take the most that could hurt the earnings per share and make that the denominator, and that will reduce the EPS. By definition, diluted EPS is either equal to or less than basic. It can never be higher than basic because we only count the actions that could cause EPS to go down. That's why we call it dilutive. Anything that could dilute the EPS, we assume happens. Anything that does not dilute EPS, we assume does not happen. The calculation in more graphic form, the basic EPS is EPS where we have net income minus dividends, preferred dividends, divided by weighted average common stock. And then we have these other dilutive effects. One might be from options and warrants. And options are typically to insiders like employees and management. Warrants are typically to outsiders like a strategic partner or as an inducement for some other transaction or relationship. So those are options to buy company shares. The other are convertibles. We talked about convertible bonds and convertible preferred. If the effective conversion causes a dilution of EPS, then we assume that that right is exercised. And if not, we leave it alone. And so that's the basic rule or concept of diluted EPS. For Johnson & Johnson, they have basic and diluted as follows. Basic is $5.56. And then below we see how we do an adjustment for the dilutive elements of the securities that could be converted or the options that could be exercised. And the diluted in this case is 5.48. So you see that's a fairly small difference of 8 cents per share. For some companies, it would be a bigger difference where there are large amounts of these contingent issuances of stock. But in J&J's case, it's a pretty small amount of dilution. The bottom talks about how does J&J go about computing this number. And they use the treasury stock method, and this is the common method, where they assume that if there was a dilutive transaction, like the exercise of an option, that J&J will use what's in the treasury in order to satisfy those particular issuances. Summarizing Module 8, Shareholders' Equity, we had Learning Objective 1, which are some of the basic features of the common stock and retained earnings. And these are authorized, issued, treasury, and outstanding shares. You should know what all four of those mean. The par value of stock, preferred versus common stock, retained earnings, and accumulated other comprehensive income. So that's stock features. Then we looked at certain transactions that occur as part of these stock transactions. So we looked at issuing stock and buying back stock. Second, we looked at stock-based compensation, such as stock options granted to employees. Fourth, we looked at cash dividends that are paid to shareholders. Then we looked at stock splits and stock dividends, both large and small dividends. Learning Objective 6 was the 4 types of transactions that comprise accumulated other comprehensive income. Learning Objective 7, convertible securities such as convertible bonds or convertible preferred stock. And finally looked at the computation differences between basic and diluted earnings per share.